Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge, the final game in the trilogy and the final game in the Master Collection. And at this point I have to ask, and this might be the worst game in the series to make this comment on, but why has Ninja Gaiden gotten the Star Wars treatment where it got remastered with controversial decisions, and now that controversial and arguably lesser version is the one that gets remastered and re-released on newer platforms? But like I said, this is not the best game to make that comment on, because from my understanding, the changes made in this one are for the most part for the better. Things like adding back dismemberment and new weapons and upgrades and just overall a raise of difficulty. So is that enough to fix what is probably one of the most disliked mainline Gaiden games? The short answer is no, but let's get into it with the story, and I'll be very honest here, I really don't like it. The amount of edge here is just overflowing, and mostly because of our kind of main villain, which of course I can't really go into much detail without spoiling why it is kind of a main villain, but this character is Regent of the Mask, and he is all of the stereotypes of the time, to the point where if someone told me this was a Ubisoft game, I would probably believe them, as this character will go on lengthy monologues and try to question Ryu's morality, like, really, after 2 games, this is the one you're gonna go, is it okay for Ryu to be killing dudes? And even just story-wise, is this really when we're gonna start caring? It's such an uninspired tale, and the game takes itself so seriously. In my previous review I said that I enjoyed this story's camp despite it probably taking itself seriously, but here it goes too far. It takes itself so seriously despite probably having even more cheese than the other entries. And so I couldn't even enjoy it on a so bad that it's good type of enjoyment. It just is bad, as cutscenes just drawn on with characters going on about the military and war and how serious it all is. It's almost like they saw Metal Gear Solid 4 and thought that's probably popular for a reason, so let's do that. And usually all of this would be fine because people don't play these games for the story, but it does affect the gameplay here with a lot of scripted scenes where, without spoiling, you just have to drag yourself along a certain section because your character will move like a snail for whatever reason. There are multiple different reasons it will happen actually. It is so plagued by the trends of its time that it really extends even to what we're going to talk about now, the gameplay. And to be fair, the feeling of the gameplay at its core is very similar to its predecessor, with the 2 attack buttons and 2 projectiles, with one of them using the triggers which have a different default control scheme from the original, which I think it's inferior, but you can't just change it in the control settings, because this Master Collection would need to have an options menu for something at least. But basically, control wise, it is the same except some basic moves are locked under a skill tree. Why? I get creating a basic skill tree for weapons and even for unlocking Nepo, but why are you going to handicap your character just to puff up this tree? Because obviously it would be a very barren skill tree without it, but it's not like any of these are new moves. When I started the game, I was just wondering why can I do such basic things like the jumping over enemies animation, and then I see that you have to buy it with the game money. And it's like, why? Who thought this was a good idea? But I digress. You get the idea. Once you unlock the missing moves, it pretty much plays like Ninja Gaiden 2 with the dismemberment mechanic. The one big change here is that they went back on the big changes that Gaiden 2 did to the health bar, which I'm super embarrassed I forgot to mention, where if you lose health in 2, you don't just lose health, you also lose a chunk of your health bar that will be blocked from regenning after a battle, which is another addition to the Ninja Gaiden series that this game doesn't take away. So what ends up happening is there's no longer a reason for health items, and so they just no longer are a thing, and honestly that's fine because now we also finally have, yes, checkpoints, and it almost makes me forgive all of its problems. This is a very forgiving checkpoint system, probably for the best, if not the only good thing to come out of this modernization and westernization of the franchise. Because what people might not know is that Ninja Gaiden was not very big in Japan when it came out. which probably led to the game taking on more Western sensibilities, except for the jiggle physics, of course, which I swear are even worse in this game because when I play my hack and slash games, I like to fap during the cutscenes, but at least they took out the feature where if the control you're using had motion controls, like for example the 6-axis on the PS3, then the movement sent by that would translate to the breasts moving on the game, which just doesn't make any sense, even if you like it because your mom blocked Rule 34 on your phone. It's just so nonsensical, and it becomes such a weird disconnect between what's happening in the world and a pair of breasts with a life of their own. But whatever, I don't want to continue on this rant. This game doesn't have this feature anyways. Now back to why this game failed in Japan. Well, it's not because of the boobs, but because it's an Xbox game, and if you know something about the Japanese gaming market, then you know that Xbox never really had a foothold there, and so this game being an exclusive to that console of course immediately had a big disadvantage in that market, which makes it a bit more understandable why the decision to westernize it. To be fair, this is not a problem exclusive to Ninja Gaiden 3, a big chunk of the Japanese market was trying to appeal to the West during that era, which was also why the PS3 and Xbox 360 era was so infamous for a lot of bad Japanese games. But let's get back to the review, because despite all the problems I said so far, if it plays like Ninja Gaiden 2, then it shouldn't really be that bad, right? Well, the problem with this game comes from the enemy variety and enemy design, and a few other additions that once again pertain to the time this game came out, starting with the quick time events, which have always have a very negative outlook on them, being that most people in the gaming sphere really don't like them, but I will say that here in Razor's Edge, it does something somewhat unique with it, having the button prompts not display but instead slowing time down at the moment of the button prompt and having you guess which one it is based on the game's controls, so in that way it's contextual. And honestly, that's a pretty clever way of going about it, even though it's still a very much scripted scene either way. So if it isn't the quick time events that mess this game up, what is it? Well, the enemies here are very repetitive. A big majority of the game will be fighting your generic soldier dudes, and it gets repetitive rather fast, especially as the game loves to pad out the playtime by often throwing you into situations where enemies just keep coming, like for example, there's this scene where you are teleported to an otherworldly location and have to fight hordes of enemies as fast as possible because your health will slowly go down and killing enemies will regenerate it. And that by itself is a novel idea, but because you are just fighting the same soldier dudes that either do melee with a shield, or ranged with guns or bazookas, it does get boring real quick. Adding to that then is the crystal skulls, which have been in every game, but here they teleport you to a challenge area where you guessed it, you will be most of the time fighting soldier dudes, or maybe an old boss fight from a previous game if you're lucky. And if I'm not wrong, I believe that's also a Razor's Edge addition to this game. And the thing is, there are other enemies, even new ones, kinda robot based in this game, and there are still demons, but they don't really show up until well deep into the games towards the end, and this is already the shortest Ninja Gaiden game, so at the end of it they aren't even used that much. And why? It's not like I was dying to fight more soldier dudes. There are just so many impossible to understand choices in the pacing and distribution of enemies that just don't work in my opinion, and that's not an unpopular opinion. Most people agree with this. And now the final thing I want to talk about, or maybe final sin of this game, is the bosses. They are by far the worst in the series, even when compared to the really bad statue ones from 2. Because now there is no redemption. In 2 the statue bosses were bad, but some of the other ones, especially the one-on-one fights, were really good. Here they're not, they're bland. You fight the main villain like 4 times and he's really not enjoyable, and then the bigger boss fights are just not enjoyable as well, as it feels like you're just chipping away at their health as they go on long-winded attack animations, which for a lot of them is so easy to just stay away and avoid them that it becomes boring. This is by far the worst part of Ninja Gaiden 3, the bosses. They're a product of its time, much like other things in this game, but here it is very much waiting for a boss to be done with its rant, then hit its weak spot. But let's move on, I'm done talking about the gameplay. So let's go into the graphics, and they're actually okay. I think the new enemy designs aren't great, but that could also be a personal thing of me preferring the ones in previous game, as they are not bad. They are still very detailed in their character models, much like other Ninja Gaiden games, and the world itself looks fine. It is a 2012 game, if you know what I mean, and because of it, it does end up looking a bit bland. The settings going back to war zones and jungles full of soldiers, cause you know, that's their natural habitat. Once again, it just feels like so much of a setback from the creative world designs of Ninja Gaiden 2 or Sigma 2, whatever you want to call it. And why? For some idea that Americans only like war zones? Well, that might be true, but it still shouldn't affect your game. The only saving grace here is the not censored blood, as there is just a lot of blood here. This is a very violent and gory game, and it even makes games like God of War 3 look tame in comparison. At points, as you paint the town red, for the lack of better words, it is by far the best part of this game when compared to the other ones in the series. Something else that is also pretty good here is the soundtrack. Funny enough, the things that other Ninja Gaidens falter on is something that Ninja Gaiden 3 kinda does well. Just happens that it also falters on everything that the other ones don't. But anyways, the music here is good. It's more of that music you heard in Ninja Gaiden 2 with that rock distorted guitar sound, and it's pretty good. It ain't getting any awards, but I really enjoyed it. And overall, while I did not like this game overall, it is a fine game. It's not the end of the world. It does a lot of questionable decisions, and it is the worst game for a lot of them, but it still has that Ninja Gaiden feel, even if it's made a lot worse, mostly because of external factors outside of the core playstyle of Ryu. And so for those reasons I am giving Ninja Gaiden Razor's Edge a 6 out of 10. It was almost a 7, but I just could not bring myself to give it that when it destroys so much of what made the series work. In terms of recommendations, well, I don't really recommend it. If you want another gory hack and slash game for that same era, then just play Metal Gear Revengeance. Or if gore doesn't matter, then just play Ninja Gaiden 2, since that one is really this game but better. Also, to finish this off, I'm sorry if this one felt more like a rant, but reviewing 3 games in a row in the same franchise can be very tiring, since I had to do it all in a very small time frame, since right now I have to make a few videos in advance to schedule them for the time that I'm gonna be out. And it's just been very tiring overall to work on so many YouTube videos. As someone who does this as a hobby, this is the closest it has felt to a full-time job that I don't get paid for. Oh well. Also, I kind of forgot to talk about the other playable characters, but much like Ninja Gaiden 2, there's not much to say about them. I wouldn't say that they're the worst thing for pacing in this version. There are worse things in this game. But regardless, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing and liking or even commenting, all things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I hope that you're having a good day, and goodbye.